go first if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bacon, thank you for your testimony. I've had the pleasure of rafting on one or more of those rivers, and it's extraordinary to have those facilities available, and your recitation of the economic impact of, I believe, human-powered recreation.
Correct.
So not including in that economic analysis the motorized. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So stacked up against the motorized, we have another part of the recreational community, and it needs to be addressed. Mr. Amador, I will note that the EPA, when did the EPA shut down the facility in San Benito County?
That was May 1, 2008. BLM issued an emergency closure order and closed it to all users, even the gem and mineral collectors that had small businesses there.
And the reason was fear over asbestos?
Yeah, fear. Even though to date there hasn't been one documented case of death from exposure to naturally occurring asbestos in a recreational capacity anywhere in California.
But we do know that large portions of California do have naturally occurring asbestos.
That is correct, 43 counties.
So it was the concern about that shut it down. You now have studies available that indicate that it may not be a problem. Is that correct?
Yes. California State Parks did commission a study, and it's a minute risk.
Okay. And I noticed that was March 22nd.
Correct.
Less than 3 months ago.
Correct.
Okay. And what's the status today?
Well, the status is the area is still closed under emergency closure order, and it's my concern that the BLM has shown no inclination to incorporate that new science into their decision-making process.
And what have you done with BLM?
Well, besides submitting comments, there was actually a OHV Commission hearing a month or so ago in Hollister, and the topic of the study was introduced to BLM, and at that time they still showed no inclination to recognize it or adopt it into their work.
I would just make a comment here briefly on that I really think the BLM did the right thing when faced with the potential public hazard. They did the right thing to shut it down and then to proceed with caution. And I suspect that given the studies and your own intense interest, that they may be considering this, and formal hearings are likely to take place to determine the appropriateness of reopening. With regard to the issue of study areas that Mr. Crimmins, you raised, in 1977 the population of California was 1/2 what it is today. And the pressures on those areas are significantly greater. Is that the case?
Yes, there is significantly greater pressure, but through careful management, that pressure can be taken care of and alleviated. The critical thing is direct people where they need to go.
And over that period of time, the budget for the U.S. Forest Service per capita and the pressures has significantly diminished. Is that also the case?
That's also true. When I retired, from then until now, the budget has gotten significantly worse. We were talking about bad budgets and how bad the budgets were when I was working, and when I was there, it was a priority problem. In my opinion, it was not a budget problem.
And now
things have changed.
Yeah, and I guess this is the point to my colleague here, Mr. Bishop, and to his caucus. These problems that we've heard about today require extensive work on the part of the federal agencies. It's very expensive. These studies have to be made in order to protect the resources, and without the appropriate funding, these issues cannot be resolved. And it seems to me extremely important that we recognize the financial strain that we're putting on all of the public land management organizations in their effort and in the necessity that they have to sort out these conflicting, sometimes conflicting, but not always conflicting, resource use issues. And the budget issue is a paramount importance and one of the fundamental underlying problems here. With that, I'll yield back my 5 seconds.
You'll get another shot at it, too. Can I ask a couple of questions of you as well? Let me start with you, Mr. Crimmins. I appreciate it. Could you spend like 10 seconds just to tell me a little bit about the professionals for managed recreation members?
Professionals for managed recreation are generally retired agency personnel that have been involved in a variety of recreation management. They support responsible motorized recreation as well as other recreation activities, but they've had experience in the field and they've been involved with that.
We often hear claims that OHV is bad for public lands. In your 30 years of experience, what have you learned about the values of providing for a managed OHV opportunity on forest lands?
Managed opportunities can be managed. In fact, I've written a book that talks about the guidelines and principles for management. And off-highway vehicle use can be managed, but it has to be managed. When we look at most of the problems, and I'm being called in the field as a consultant a number of times to look at things, and usually when I find a problem, it's a management problem to start with.
You indicated your support for 1581 based on your years as a former Forest Service employee. What do you think happens to BLM, for that matter, to your agency and BLM, if Congress doesn't pass the legislation?
Once again, we're going to be back in that paralysis analysis type situation, and my experience has shown that the agency generally tries to manage around those kind of areas. They just don't deal with it because it's too much conflict, and that they're going to continue that.
Thank you. And I'll come back to hopefully again before I run out. Since I'm the last one here, I can go forever, can't I? Mr. Amador, let me ask you something.
Yes, sir.
You feel that the BLM has embarked on a campaign to make Hollister Field Office an OHV-free zone?
Yes.
What other opportunities for OHV are there in the area?
None. In fact, within the entire Hollister Field Office has wiped off OHV symbols from their website.
I understand that the Forest Service in California Region 5 has taken a position which prohibits local forests from designating old logging roads for use as OHVs. I think there's thousands of miles of dirt roads in rural California that have been closed to motorized use. Has the region ever given a substantial justification for actually doing that?
No.
Good answer. All right. Let me give you two more quick ones if I can here. I saw in your testimony where the BLM in the Samoa Dunes near Eureka, California, in the Redlands National Park, simply post warning signs to caution users about life-threatening conditions. Did you ask Hollister Field Office why he didn't review other options or review such options before closing Clear Creek to all users?
Yes, on several occasions I asked the field manager why he did not review other options that would have allowed Clear Creek to stay open, and they simply replied by saying, I chose not to.
That's an amazing answer, and I apologize for using my Utah accent, calling it Crick.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I do it. I'm from Humboldt County.
Okay, we're Cricks.
Okay.
Can I ask you one more? What was the BLM aware, well, are you aware of any documented cases of mesothelioma caused by recreational exposure to naturally occurring asbestos in California? Are there any cases?
Not a single case.
If there are none, and this is unfair, but give me a rough estimate of why do you think they still closed the unit?
I believe it was based on a political and personal agenda of the Hollister Field Office.
Thank you. Mr. Crimmins, if I can ask you maybe another question. I find it interesting that it was your expectations the wilderness study areas inventoried roadless areas that were deemed not suitable for wilderness designation would be released for multiple purpose use. Would you say that other land managers at the time felt the same way as you did?
Absolutely. In fact, many of our discussions in the field, we were in a position of saying, well, do we put it in or do we put it out or do we leave it out? It may meet it, but we actually put it in to make sure that we go through the analysis process and then get everything done and release what was left.
Yeah, Mr. Bacon, I can't let you go that easily. It's like from Central Casting. What percentage of North Carolina is federal land?
I don't know the answer to that specifically.
So if I give you 7%, would you believe it?
I would.
Yeah, 2,500 acres. And you compare that to my state, which is 67% federal land. I'm an old school teacher, so I'm simply going to come back to the premise of what you were giving. Do you have any clue on why, if you take the 13 states that have the hardest time funding their education system, and you put them against a map of public land states, they're the same? North Carolina ain't in that mix. Utah is. Nevada is. Do you have an idea of why that works out that way?
I would suspect because of the tax base.
That's a big part of it. We have. Well, I won't go into the recapture concept here. Let me ask one last question, Mr. Amador, and then I'll answer my own question. Mr. Amador, have you met with any other members from the other side of your aisle to try and get bipartisan legislation that you referenced in your testimony to designate Clear Creek as multi-use?
Yes, I and a number of OHV groups have met with Congressman Jim Costa personally and his staff, along with staff from Senator Dianne Feinstein's office on several occasions, as well as their staff attending public meetings, and also other OHV groups have met with Congressman Sam Farr.
Okay. And their response?
Congressman Jim Costa has indicated he would be willing to work with this committee to maybe find a solution.
Good. We'll follow up with him on that.
Thank you.
I appreciate all three of you from being here. Just to answer my last question, when I said, what was Gifford Pinchon talking about? I mean, he made it very clear when he was talking about greatest good for the greatest number, and actually having a national forest system. It wasn't for the scenic beauty, and it wasn't for the critters, as he said it. It was for having affordable homes. We've changed slightly over the